Thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Project Censored radio show on Pacifica Radio. We're very glad to welcome back to the program Chelsea White-Hoglen, who's a Master of Social Work and a lifelong resident of Western North Carolina, currently based in Haywood County, who has a vast background and foreground in community organizing across various settings, from nonprofits to autonomous grassroots work and, of course, mutual aid. She's the host and producer of Rednecks Rising, an anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist Appalachian podcast, which organically evolved into a platform to amplify and organize mutual aid support in collaboration with groups like Rural Organizing and Relief and Mutual Aid Disaster Relief following Hurricane Helene. Chelsea, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me back on.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we try to do on this show is to buck, both in theory and in practice, the corporate media's tendency to, oh my gosh, trauma porn, 24 hours of a disaster, and then leave and never come back again. And it's a very extractive relationship that corporate media has with frontline folks. So, especially in a place like Appalachia that has been, as one person in my documentary put it, has been a resource colony since the founding of the United States and has really just dealt with disaster after disaster, both quote unquote natural and, of course, man-made. I wanted to talk to you about the current situation down there. We spoke to you last year, and folks can go back and listen to that interview with Chelsea from last year, not long after Hurricane Helene hit. And yet a couple of months ago, about 6 months after Helene, wildfires spread throughout the region, torching thousands of acres. So I feel kind of ridiculous asking this question, but how are you? And what's the situation down there?
How am I? Doesn't that contain multitudes? I think I, as a person, am doing okay. I think collectively Western North Carolina is doing okay. There are a lot of areas of the recovery effort that have made substantial progress, and there's a lot of areas of the recovery effort that have not at all. And in many ways, even the parts of the recovery process that have made substantial progress feels like that progress is more or less rebuilding a shell of what we had before rather than actually returning to normal, which I think, at least for me, none of us ever fully expected to return to normal, but there is that hope, right? And that grief around, as time passes and as more progress is made, the true recognition of, oh, I will never see or experience my home the way that I did on September 25th ever again. So I think we're doing okay. We have a lot to be grateful for, and we're still holding a lot of grief, and we have a really long way to go. And as you mentioned with the wildfires, I think this is something everyone in Western North Carolina and beyond has to reckon with. But the climate crisis, the ecological devastation, the economic destruction that we are entering into are all compounding on each other. Those wildfires were fueled in large part by the remaining flood debris. And so we're entering into this state of reality where each crisis feeds into another crisis and into another crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you pointed out, many of them are in fact man-made and totally avoidable. And with that, the flip side of that coin is how the system that makes and creates these crises is responding. I saw about a week ago our mutual friends over at Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, and they do rad work. So I'm certainly not like I'm not trying to like diss them for posting this, because it is a legit offering. It's just a ridiculous one on behalf of on the state's part. They posted about how North Carolina residents could get a free fan this summer if you're eligible. And it's like this little, like, folks, I'm talking about like a box fan. I'm not talking about like a rad window unit that can like, cool an entire house. It's a box fan. And I just looked at that and I was like, God, this is such a metaphor. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the absurd quote unquote offerings that the state is making and how y'all are trying to fill the gaping chasms between that and what people need.
Yeah. Woo! I think I spoke about this a little bit in our original interview, which is this difference between what the government, the state entity is actually designed to do and what people want it to do and really in many ways need it to do. And the state is here to check boxes, to account for their own losses. How much money have we poured into this region and have to make up for now? But they are not actually here to make life comfortable for people here. So, what we're seeing, and this is something that I had said from the very beginning, is what we're seeing now is the full unfolding of the second chapter of this, which is the economic crisis for Western North Carolina. We are largely rooted in tourism economy now, which is the latest version of an extractive resource economy. And that means we lost a huge chunk of our tourist season last year with Hurricane Helene. So, on top of the lost revenue that we had from the immediate aftermath of the storm, we also have now less demand for those tourism services and less demand from consumers that are rooted here in Western North Carolina because we don't have extra spending money. And so what we see is that now folks are still displaced. They have less money, they are unemployed or have significant hours cut. Many of our businesses shutting doors or still trying to get back open if they see a hope for themselves. And so what the government has pretty much done is given us some money to help with this, not nearly the degree to what we need, and a lot of bureaucratic processes and applications that we need to go through in order to get access to those funds. So, I mean, for mutual aid groups right now, we're kind of building this bridge between still holding the line of survival for our folks, right? Making sure that people have shelter, food, the basic necessities to get through day to day, but also trying to create a path for long-term recovery and really figuring out what it means to create a new way of being because we are never going to get the resources that we need from our government to fully thrive or survive here. And so kind of like what you said, a window fan as a resource for extreme heat. And even then, you can only get one if you are eligible. So it's just like, how are you eligible for a window fan? I don't understand, or a box fan rather. Um, and I mean, that really is, like you said, a metaphor for the other types of aid that are being offered to our region, right? We have a chunk of change that is largely mostly loans that has been offered to some of the smaller local businesses that are trying to reopen. We have folks who lost everything to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars whose homes literally floated away into the French Broad River. And even if they had flood insurance, they are still getting screwed, getting offered, maybe 20, 30 grand for their flood insurance. And then from FEMA, another 4 or 5 grand on top of that. And we have areas of our region that are literally impossible to rebuild on because where property used to be, it is now just river. So people cannot even rebuild their home and they are left to depend on mutual aid, which is under-resourced already. And we are scrappy and we will do whatever we can with whatever we have. But that means that we're setting up massive campgrounds for folks who would otherwise be homeless, right? We're also entering into this part of the recovery process where we are over 30 weeks since Helene hit it now, and the unemployment benefits last, I think the cap is at 20 weeks. So folks are now not even able to rely on whatever aid they were getting from the government to kind of assist them through this period of time in the immediate aftermath of the storm. I think that, then of course in January, we also had the transition of our federal administration. It was already inadequate. prior to the inauguration. There was already insufficient support for us and a lack of funding and resources. And then we have a new administration step in who cuts that back even further and takes what little bit we had to depend on. So the cuts to AmeriCorps funding that caused over 30,000 AmeriCorps staff volunteers to have to stop their work, many of whom were doing work in ecological restoration and disaster recovery. So for mutual aid, at this point, it is really becoming, in my opinion, a infrastructure of its own that we have to depend on. Our government is, and I will say for our local governments, they are doing the best that they can also to fill that gap of the larger federal government failings and state government failings. But these are tiny governments that didn't have a lot of resources of their own to depend on either, right? And so even in my town of Waynesville, there's a bridge across the road called Depot Street that is a major connector for most of our traffic. And it was just last month that that bridge was able to be repaired to be used again by traffic. And so if a small bridge is just 2 lanes, one in each direction, it's not even a massive project, but it took over 6 months for that project to be completed, even pouring all of these resources into it from our local government. And so you can imagine if they are having to focus on these infrastructure projects, what little they have left over for the individual households and the community members who were impacted by this. And that's really where mutual aid is stepping in. We're still doing things like just a couple of weeks ago, we were up in Yancey County rebuilding a retention wall for folks who would be threatened if that were to, if any more water were to come down their hill and it destroyed the garden that they depended on for their herbalism work that they do. And as we are trying to fill this gap, what we're also having to do is hold the line for the new crises that are coming in as a result of this, right? So when the wildfires hit, our government can offer box fans for extreme heat, but what they couldn't offer was air filters, right? For our elders with COPD or our folks with asthma who were breathing in this wildfire smoke. And while we appreciate and are so grateful for the first responders who actually held the line of the fire and protected structures, I don't think we had any structural damage in Western North Carolina anyways from the wildfires that were spreading because of the work of those first responders. What they weren't able to do was keep the long-term impact from landing in our community around the health hazards, et cetera. So our mutual aid groups were the ones who were responding with DIY air filters, making them for people, distributing them to folks, getting out education, right, to folks about how to keep your property as safe as possible from wildfire and also take care of themselves. And, I was one of the folks out there who was distributing air filters. And so I had parents of small children who were concerned about the smoke that their children was breathing. We also are now, there's a storm front moving in across the Southeast right now that we are looking at in mutual aid networks that I'm sure is some of the government response to, and are just thinking, how far back is this going to set us? So we have this psychological trauma per Hurricane Helene, but then we get these reports of, we're going to get, more inches of rain dumped on us. And we're just thinking, oh no, what does this mean for the community that hasn't even recovered yet? And how can we as the mutual aid network be more prepared and more adequately prepared for disasters like these so that we can respond and so that folks aren't just feeling the compounded impacts of crisis after crisis. And of course, for mutual aid, while we have our hyper local groups, we're organizing a resistance based out of Madison County. We also are part of larger networks. So then what that means is when the flooding hit in central Appalachia in January, a lot of our networks are also mobilizing outside of our immediate local communities to show up for our neighboring communities too, because we recognize that what we're experiencing right now is borderless and it may happen in specific communities, but at the end of the day, the crisis is really a shared crisis. And unless all of us are able to respond to it together and address it together, then we're all just going to keep going through the same things over and over. And if I could just say, I think that's the government's biggest failing right there, is that these band aid solutions and not actually creating alternative ways of being to slow down or stop these crises from perpetuating, that is where their role should be, because we can only do so much as these groups of mutual aid organizers to show up for our community, but we can't change the larger scope of what is actually destroying and contributing to these crises. They are in part natural, but so much of it, as we know, is man-made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into the question of like political education as a part of this organizing, but first I want to get your thoughts on the quote unquote aid package. Um what are your thoughts on that, Chelsea?
Aid package. I love that our government can just make up words and like slap it on something and think we'll fall for it. Um, I mean, there's this aid package that was passed in December, technically, that even that, out of $110 billion, North Carolina as a state, not our region, but North Carolina as a state is likely to see like maybe 10 billion of that if we're lucky, which doesn't even come close to covering the cost of Helene's impact by itself, right? And this is the thing about the federal government, is that they can claim that they are pouring all of these resources into communities. And it may be true to an extent that this kind of money is allocated for communities like ours, for disaster relief, for education, whatever it is. But even after it gets allocated, there is still all of these hands, these bureaucratic hands that are in the pot that then have to take that money and decide where it's going to be spent and where it's going to go. So this aid package, whatever little crumbs come from it, it's going to be months, if not another year, before we even start to see that in our community. And it's almost guaranteed that it's not going to go to the folks who need it the most and the most directly impacted communities, right? It's probably going to go to the major corporations who want to invest in our region, right? Who want to bring back jobs in our region. And most of those jobs are going to be minimum wage jobs, and they are not actually going to contribute to a sustainable economy or quality of life for our people whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean it's a classic tale of like the trickle down idea. It's like, oh well, we sent all this money to this region, but how much did it actually get to the people whose houses floated away or burned down or whatever the disaster is in whatever part? Very little. And in order to get those little crumbs, as you talked about, there's so much bureaucratic red tape. It's so Kafkaesque. It's like, you got to be eligible for this and you got to prove that you did this and you got to be, it's like, but I just need help. Like, why can't we just help people that need help? Um, and I,
Exactly.
and I want to slightly shift here because there's this very real, and I recognized this too growing up. I grew up in North Carolina, but not in Appalachia and Charlotte. I would frequently go to Appalachia to get away from Charlotte. Um, but but something that I saw a lot and heard a lot was these very real ripping apart of people across party lines that are in fact fake, as in both parties serve the same purpose and the same master, and that's definitely not the people. And so I'd hear a lot of people saying things like, oh, well, they voted for that, so let them deal with it, as if anybody voted for their house to float away. And basically saying that it's your fault. Now you're going to have to live with this decision, as if people who voted for Democrats are any less propagandized or hoodwinked by their party. Indeed, I would oftentimes say that they are more so. But it's really this idea that because your analysis of the political situation is wrong, you deserve to, all of the horrible things that happen. And I wanted to get your take on this because this is something that I've seen a lot in places like the Southeast, in Appalachia. And it is like really this perpetuation of the oppressive mentality of the system. So I wanted to get your take on this and how you see this manifesting in really destructive ways where you are.
Oh, yeah. I can go on a whole soapbox about this. The attitude that folks, especially big D Democrats, big L liberals, perceive Appalachia and the attitudes that they direct towards Appalachians, rural folks, folks in the South, especially, is literally just supremacy culture. That is all it is. It is a redirection of this supremacy mindset towards a group of people that it feels acceptable to have that attitude towards, right? Demonstrates how they would act and perceive other groups of people who look and think differently from them if it were acceptable for them to do that, right? But it's only acceptable in this situation because we, as Appalachians, who they think voted largely for Trump, which actually the majority of us don't vote at all because we feel like both parties don't give a crap about us. And that is the truth. Um, they see us as morally inferior, right? So that is where the superiority complex comes from. Like they may think like, oh no, Appalachians are the bad guys because they voted for this person. So that's why they deserve it. But actually what it is they are morally inferior to me. So that is why they deserve it. And what the biggest consequence of this attitude, in my opinion, because I came of age as a community organizer through the Democratic Party, actually. That's how I kind of got my start in canvassing and knocking on doors was through elections, et cetera. And the biggest consequence from that angle is that it only further makes Appalachians and rural communities and communities in the South not want to vote for Democratic candidates. So if that is someone's ideal outcome, if they are thinking, oh, if Appalachians would only vote for the Democrats, this would all be better. That's what I want them to do. Well, you're not helping that outcome come to fruition if this is what you are putting out into the world. Because now we know that you see us as inferior and we know that you don't care what happens to us. So then why would we turn around and vote for your candidates? But, I think also, just to go back to 2021 and share a little bit of my experience from that year. That year, Biden was in office rather than Trump, right? And we were hit here in Haywood County by Tropical Storm Fred, which was much more concentrated as far as the scale goes. So it hit a much smaller surface area and got a lot less attention. But it was here in Haywood County, and I was doing what I'm doing now, and we were feeding people and taking care of people. And I had multiple neighbors of mine up in Crusoe say to me that they thought, so it took us, I'm trying to remember exactly how long, around 2 to 3 weeks for us to get a emergency declaration in 2021. And I remember folks saying to me, oh, we're not getting it because they hate us because we voted for Trump here. So this idea, this attitude that Democrats hate us actually is something that gets like really ingrained in our bodies and our systems. And one thing that I just want to invite folks who do support the Democrats and do vote for them or who have this attitude to consider is that, for one, again, crises like these don't have borders. So what is happening here, consider it the canary in the coal mine for what folks are going to experience, regardless of whether you live in a blue state or a red state, regardless of who you voted for. If we don't get our crap together and stop feeding into the systems that are destroying our environment, that are extracting our resources, that are feeding into this, then everyone is going to go through this and no one is going to save us. But the second thing that I want to invite folks to consider too is that exactly what you said, the Democrats are equally as complicit in what we are going through right now as the Republicans are. What we are experiencing in Western North Carolina is not the result of a Republican being in office. That is ludicrous. I think about Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin and how much money from the company that is building the Mountain Valley Pipeline has gone into those two Democrats' pockets, and how there have been activists in Appalachia saying, please hold the Democrats accountable. We have to stop this right now. And folks just brush us off, right? And so then we get the consequences of these actions, these projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We see them firsthand out here. We try to raise the red flag. Folks brush us off. Then we get through an election. They think that we vote for conservatives, and then they say, oh, you deserve it. And then we're just in this constant feedback, and no one is winning. The last thing I'll say about it is, so what about all of the folks in Appalachia who were infected by Helene that were trans, that are Black people, that are Indigenous? A portion of the Qualla boundary of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians got hit out here. So all of this allyship that is portrayed by the big D Democrats and the big L liberals, does that just disappear when those folks who hold those identities of LGBTQ, people of color, et cetera, when they live in an area that is predominantly perceived to be conservative and morally inferior, do they just cease to matter because of this like sense of righteous indignation towards the rest of the community? Because that is not, if the solidarity is conditional based on it, you have to look like me, you have to think like me, you have to do the right things, and that is not solidarity. And it is just leaving those folks that we claim to be allies with out to dry. And I'll say right now, the majority of the people who were deeply impacted by this, maybe not majority, the majority of the people that I have been supporting through my mutual aid work that were impacted by this are folks who fall into those marginalized, historically oppressed identity groups, right? I have multiple trans friends who had to evacuate, who lost their jobs, lost their housing, and not to mention it was already hard enough to find housing and jobs, et cetera, as a person who is a part of these marginalized and oppressed groups. So this rhetoric, this idea that we deserve it, even if it could be correctly applied towards a fraction of the community that did vote Republican or vote conservative, it couldn't be applied to the rest of the community that was already suffering under the oppression of white supremacist capitalism. And the thing about mutual aid is that it actually creates an opportunity to create a new way of being in relationship with one another outside of these divisive dynamics. When I was feeding hot meals out of the Pigeon Center in the very first earliest weeks after Helene, there was one individual who came in with his MAGA hat every day to eat his hot meal. And I wore my anti-capitalist and Appalachian hat, and I fed him his hot meal every day. And the Pigeon Center is run by Black women who are members of a family that is a historic Black family that has been rooted in Haywood County for generations. And this man with his MAGA hat was coming on, and he was being fed a hot meal by his neighbors who are Black women, who are anti-capitalist Appalachians. And eventually one day, he didn't wear his hat in to the Pigeon Center. And there was no political debate that needed to happen. The political education happened in showing up for each other and in talking about why we have to show up for each other when the people in charge should be doing this work. And instead, it's us, it's our neighbors. And so that the best way to change hearts and minds, if that is our goal, is to show up, not to shame.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully put. And I mean, as you put it, like if that is our goal, a friend of mine, Scott Crow, who's done a lot of great work, and especially after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, said like, I'm not running a church here. I'm not out to convert people. I'm just out to we're just out to do mutual aid. And I think that's the thing too. It's like the goal. We're not doing this as some kind of like underhanded, like, ooh, we're going to change his mind by giving him food. Like we're not Pavlov, and they're not our dogs. Like that's not the framing that we have. But I think that's a good point. Like, when we're doing like community gardening or mutual aid, it's like nobody asks like, hey, who did you vote for when you walk in? Because it would be just as absurd to be like, what color underwear do you have on? It's just like a totally ridiculous question that has no bearing on whether you're hungry or whether you need, this kind of medical support or what have you. And I think that this is, I want to wrap up here by asking about political education as a part of mutual aid. And in my experience, it's been just through having conversations, like literally like sitting down with folks who predominantly like in poor white communities in the South. Like, yeah, I mean, let's sit down and have a beer or a cup of tea or whatever. And, somebody will say something like, I don't trust the Democrats. I'm like, hey, man, me neither. And, like, you just have this organic conversation, and there at the end of it, there's no, like, "Oh, I won." It's not like a debate stage. It's really just an honest conversation between neighbors, and I wanted to ask you about that and your experiences in doing this kind of political education that really comes not from a stance of, "Oh, I'm gonna change your mind," but, "Hey, how can we both learn something here and maybe work towards our shared goals outside of the confines of the two-party system?"
Yeah, absolutely. There is no, when we are doing our mutual aid, there is not an intentional educational component to it, right? Like we are not planning for how to educate people. We are not proselytizing to anyone, but we understand that our work is rooted in this desire to co-create an alternative. And when it is rooted in that, it becomes very easy to have these organic conversations about our why, right? And one of the things, even prior to the mutual aid work, as I got into my community organizing journey, one of the things that my organizing work started to be really centered around was storytelling and vulnerability, because so many of us are told that our stories don't matter, that we don't matter. We are shamed for the pieces of our stories that other folks disagree with or don't like. And there is a radical transformation that takes place when we just hold space for people without judgment, when we hold space for them to be vulnerable, to share, and to be human, and when we bear witness to their humanity. Um, so when it comes to the political education of mutual aid, like one of the things that we've been working on here in Haywood County is we've opened a free store recently, which is just the long term recovery version of a distribution hub, essentially. And as folks have come in, and they ask about it and they're like, "Oh, what's going on here? Where do you get most of your donations?" All I have to do is explain the concept of mutual aid and a free store. And they are like, "Whoa, this is exactly what we need." So when I explain it, I'm explaining, oh, the donations come from each other. They come from within the community. The idea of a free store is that we all have something we need. There's no shame behind being someone who has a need, and that we all have something that we can offer, whether it is big or small. There is no such thing as too small, no such thing as too big. And so, as an example, I had an expectant mother come in who was asking if we had any maternity clothes. And I was like, "Oof, I don't have any, but I will certainly ask around and come back in and maybe we'll have some next time." Shortly after that, I had a new mom with a fresh little baby come in, and she got some things and she was asking us where we got our donations from. And I said, just from within the community, we all share. And then I thought, oh, actually, I had an expecting mom come in who needed some maternity clothes, and you just recently gave birth. If you happen to have any maternity clothes left over that you would like to bring in, that would be really helpful. So she did. She brought in those maternity clothes. They got taken back by that expecting mother and another expecting mother who came in later because there were leftover clothes. And it creates this idea of, or this sensation of, wow, I can contribute to my community and they want me to live and survive and they're going to take care of me, as opposed to like within the two-party system, but within the like larger construct of white supremacist capitalism. The charity industrial complex that folks are used to puts us into, it's yet another dichotomy, right? Of the givers and the takers. And if you are someone who has a need and you're here to take, that's because you've done something wrong. You aren't in a good enough place to be a giver. So therefore you are a taker. And the truth is that's just not how things work. Our lives fluctuate. Sometimes we need more than other times in our lives. Sometimes we have more to give than at other times in our lives. And so just showing up in this way and kind of nipping that in the bud and explaining it to people as such begins that process of recalibrating their neural pathways around, oh, why do other institutions make me feel like I have to be poor enough to qualify for some kind of help? And I even had one of the moms who had come in from that story. The second or third time that she had come into the free store, she shared with us, she's like, I could cry every time I come in here because y'all are so nice and I feel warm and welcome. I don't feel like I'm being judged or condemned. And that translates over also to our political process, right? When we make folks feel warm and welcome as opposed to judged and condemned, then they are more likely to want to engage and feel valuable and feel like they're there for a reason. So the political education is through these conversations that we have, just explaining why we're here, what we're doing, why we care, what we get out of it. And yeah, chill it out at the end of a volunteer shift, drinking a beer together. Someone mentions, I don't trust the Democrats. And I say, me either, because where are they right now? you know? And talking through what I would say the way things should be. Because then we see that we have a shared vision for our community, not the way that things should be in the White House, right? Like, not who should be in charge, those things, what policies we need, but the way things should be just when we wake up and we walk through the world, that we should feel safe, we should feel warm, we should feel fed, and like we can turn to our neighbors for a cup of sugar when we need one. And I think that this political education, there's something about a crisis that strips down a lot of the divisions that keep us apart because we just are trying to survive. And, with the new administration, I think we're going to see a lot of manifestations of crises in different forms. And this is what, in many ways, I feel Helene was a gift almost to us so that we could start planting these seeds before the next layer of this crisis really takes hold in our community, because we're going to be so much stronger because we know that we can rely on each other, because we have built these relationships and these networks. And if we wanted to reframe, if there was any political education behind mutual aid, what I would say it is reframing from a two-party system of Democrats and Republicans to a two-party system of corporations and communities, right? And so we're there in the community saying, this is all we want is our community. And folks are learning from that what it means to be in community again and to reclaim their sense of togetherness and solidarity.
Yeah, beautifully put. And so important. And from that stems all kind of other conversations, like why the US war machine means that we don't have money here at home, and like the war on workers is connected to the war. I mean, all of these things then stem from those porch conversations. And if you're not in the Southeast, then I guess stoop conversations or whatever you'll have to sit on. Sit down and have a conversation with your neighbors. So Chelsea, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about what's going on down there. Where is a good place for folks to not only hear more about what's going on, but maybe support the work that y'all are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Please follow. We're still talking about this on Rednecks Rising Media a good bit, so folks can check out the link tree that we have up, linktree.com/Rednecks Rising, and find some links on there to some different groups that they can support. Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is still in the ground doing great works, as is ROAR, that rural organizing and resistance group up in rural organizing and relief group that is up in Madison County. And we actually also have I'm really excited about this. We're working on an anthology project called From the Holler to the Sea, Hurricane Helene Survivors Speak Out. It's going to be a print anthology that we're hoping to put out in the fall of this year. That is a collection of contributions from different Hurricane Helene survivors. And all of the funds from that and the proceeds from that are going back into the mutual aid work. So that is another way that folks can both learn and amplify the voices of survivors while also supporting the mutual aid work. And then, and Beloved, as I mentioned last time, and Pansy Collective as well, are all still doing really great work on the ground, holding it down, and we're all kind of supporting each other through this. So we know that if funds end up in mutual aid disaster relief's bank account, that they will get where they need to go here in the community too, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't send money to the Red Cross, y'all. Just don't.
Yes, please don't. Or like United Cajun Navy or whatever
Yeah,
their name is.
find some grassroots folks who like actually are connected to those communities that are in need. So thank you again, Chelsea. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eleanor.